is 12 o'clock and I know we have a lot of information to get through, and I see we do have a couple of people on, so welcome and thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll have a few other community members join us as they are able here in the next hour. So today what we have is a little bit different. We have a facility open house, and last night we did an in-person version, and today we are offering the virtual. So this is going to be a little bit different than last night in the fact that we're going to actually have a presentation and then go through the information and then be able to ask questions and gain feedback at the end. So if you can see, you should be able to see my screen, and in the chat function, I did put a survey in the chat function. So we have a list of questions as we go through this information that we're asking if you could fill out and send back to the district so we can just get some feedback from you in addition to any questions you have. So if you do have questions, feel free to put those in the chat function, and we'll be answering them either as we go or at the end. We have allotted some time for questions. Oops. So we have a group of people that are that have been working hard on the planning process. And so today we have with us is Dr. Paula Henry. She'll be speaking, Craig Barr, Becky Mitchell, myself, Lori Christensen, Dan Miller, Glenn Chido, and Jody Zespa. So each one of them have a few minutes that they're going to speak on different components within the planning process. We're going to start out with talking about where the plan had started, and then being able to go through some results we've seen, some financial pieces, the plans, talk about a middle school model, and then look at some questions at the end. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Becky, and she's going to get us started with the plan.
Hi, thank you, Lori. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So, back in 2019, we had really, the conversation kind of started with amongst a few board members and administration, really talking about how, the high school was now about 10 years old, and the plan all along was to, the elementary would be in the next phase, and we were starting to see some crowding, and I'm sure Craig will maybe be speaking to this later, but we were starting to see some areas that were just at max capacity, and like so many other districts, you start using the closets and the locker rooms and just all those spaces that you never think you'll have to use before space becomes an issue. And the board at that time had decided that they would really like to have more involvement beyond just that group, kind of coming up with the vision and what we felt would be the answer to these challenges. And so the Growth and Long-Term Planning Committee was formed. And that's comprised of, there's some board involvement, there's administration level involvement, but there's also staff level involvement and community member level. And so that group began to meet and went through the needs of the district, walked through both schools, talked with administration and teachers, and just really started to kind of identify needs. And then we pulled in ICS to help lead us through this process and going through the strategic plan. So that we came down to looking at demographics and building capacity and just all of the needs, if you will. We did start doing some community listening sessions as far as listening to identifying those needs, and some staff survey or some community surveying, excuse me. We pulled in JLG to start taking those visions that we were having and putting them down on paper as what that could look like in a new facility. And the board in the last, I'd say 6 months maybe, has started to take a little bit more active role and is going through some of those same steps that committee did as well to identify those needs, and are coming up with the same conclusions, I would say. but are also looking at maybe refining. Are there areas that we need to wait on? You know, for instance, one of the areas we talked about was a daycare, having a daycare added onto the elementary school. There's a real need in our region for that. We looked at that pretty heavily, and due to a variety of reasons, that's already something the board has maybe said, man, we maybe better focus on what our needs are. We can look at that a little bit later. But now we're really to the point where we want to hear from all of you. There's the middle school model is still on the table. There's CTE conversations that are on the table. And so it's really the time that the board wants to hear from the community. Are we ready to go for a referendum in the fall? And what does that dollar amount look like? And what do you want to see in our schools? Are you wanting to see a middle school model over at the high school? Do you know what a middle school model is? Do you need more information on that? Or do you really want to see the sixth graders staying at the elementary school? So this is really the time to get feedback from our community as we start to finalize those architectural plans and look at the project costs. Anything else you'd like me to say, Lori? And then enrollment. So an independent firm was pulled in to kind of look at our projected enrollment. And we knew that we were already at a max space level a few years ago. And so what this is really showing us is that despite, a COVID year and students going to distance learning and what have you, that need is still there. We've had a very steady enrollment increase since we opened our new facility at the high school 10 years ago. And did some remodeling at the elementary at that time. So this slide really is showing those enrollment projections, a little bit of history, but also then the projections.
Thank you. This is Glenn Chido, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the assessments that were just mentioned before. One of the assessments that we did was, we called it listening sessions, and we talked to and sat down with the internal group, which is your teachers, your students, your board, and so on. And we also had external groups, meaning community groups. What you see in front of you right now are a series of questions or list of questions. There was no right or wrong answer to any of this. It was all related on what their opinions were related to that particular question. In a minute here, I'm going to draw your attention to the bullet on the right-hand side of the screen, the facility needs. But we sat down with all the groups, and all the groups got the exact same questions that that each other got, so that we could have commonalities in the data that we presented. Go ahead, Lori. One of the questions, and I just mentioned it, was the facility question. So in other words, we asked, what were the greatest facility needs? And on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the internal groups. And again, that was your staff, students, and so on and so forth. Now, what you see in front of you is in no particular order. It's just how we put it on the slide. On the right-hand side is the internal group. And you can see by the arrows where the common themes were. And this was a critical part of the data that we were trying to provide back to the board. Where do you see common themes, common ideas coming from both internal and external groups? And as you can see, a lot of it tied into your elementary school or updates and so on and so forth. Go ahead, Laurie. One of the other things we did, another assessment, it's a completely different assessment than what I was just talking about, was educational adequacy. What it amounts to is, down in the right-hand corner, you see Minnesota Department of Ed. They have information, and they have put together a data that pertain to, and we put it in categories that pertain to how spaces should be and look like. So in other words, what's the square footage, natural light, storage, counter space, and so on and so forth. What ICS did is we put together an assessment tool. So what you see in front of you are 18 different categories, and I'm not going to go through each one of them, but you can, as you look at them, you'll see that they cover a wide range of what the school building, and this is primarily the building, the brick and mortar, so to speak. So each got, you'll see a couple there, classroom size and suitability, cafeteria, and so on and so forth. So we did this assessment, and what I mean by that is we walked the buildings, we measured every space, looked at every nook and cranny, storage, counter spaces in rooms, and so on and so forth, and collected our data. And then we put together an assessment data summary for the board, and we presented that back. Go ahead, Lori. So what you see in front of you, now the color codes are ours. So in other words, this didn't come from MDE. But let me draw your attention now. This is just the elementary building in itself. On the left-hand side, you see the categories. On the right next to it, you'll see a bunch of pretty colors, and then you see a lot of greens on the right-hand side of that columns. On the left-hand side, and this is where I'm going to talk to today, where you see a green, that means that that category or that information that we collected matched up with the MD guidelines, and it either met or exceeded those guidelines. Where you see a yellow, that means it partially did and partially didn't. And what we often refer to that as 1 foot in the boat and 1 foot out. Where you see a red, that means it fell short. So let's take a look at the column there where all the reds and yellows and greens are. And that's, again, your current elementary building with classroom size and suitability, that type of thing. You have 22 classrooms, and the vast majority of them, 16 of them, quite frankly, are all undersized. They're all under 800 square feet. A normal classroom should be anywhere from 850 to 950. On the cafeteria, same situation, grossly undersized. You walk into the kitchen area, you got to go through a cooler to get to a freezer. I mean, it just was not working very well relative to the guidelines. I'll leave the yellow, the number 3 alone, number 4 alone. Again, it's green. Where you see 5 and 6, typically in an elementary school, they don't have specific rooms for science and art. That's why you see a NA. On number 7 there, music classroom, again, undersized, limited counter space or storage, if you will, acoustical issues, and so on and so forth. No natural light. 8 and 9 kind of go together, but the teaching planning area, we not only looked at where the teachers actually ate, but we looked at for collaborative spaces. Quite frankly, there isn't any. And when you look at number 9 on the breakout space, this is related to where teachers could bring a larger group of kids and take them out of the classroom setting and be able to do some other things outside of that. The problem that you currently have at the elementary school is that every space is already taken. So they really got to find something where someone just doesn't happen to be. Thus is, again, a number, or they got a red in that case. Number 11, the site and suitability. Of course, that's on the south end of the building. What the problem is there, you've got a small playground area, but it's got P-rock in it. So it's not ADA accessible, which is difficult, obviously, for the handicapped kids. There's a lot of green space across the street. The key word is there, street. It's right next to the bus garage. So kids have to go across the street to get to some green space. Thus is where the red came there. And number 15 down at the bottom, out of 22 special needs services classrooms, only 3 met criteria. The rest were undersized. There again, we look for calming spaces, natural light, and so on and so forth. Now, before I go to the next slide, I want to draw your attention up to the right-hand corner. This particular piece here is related to if nothing changed on the grade levels. In other words, this is still pre-K and then a 7-12 high school building. Go ahead, Lori. Now, there's been discussion about this middle school model. Now, on the left-hand side of the page, or the slide, I should say, you see the same thing that you just saw in the last slide. But let me point out to the purple color there in the middle where it says MS and HS to the top. If in fact they're able to, or they ultimately move to that middle school model, which means they're going to move their 6th grade over, now you can see where the color schemes are. Now, keep in mind you do see some yellows, and I should have mentioned this earlier. Yellow doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means that part of it fell short on the guidelines. But you see lots of greens, lots of yellows there. So in fact, if that movement was made, if they went to that middle school model and moved the 6th grade over, spacing wise, they'd still have to make a couple of adjustments at the high school, but for the most part, it's an adequate space and it would work. The only one that's maintained the red was down at number 15. There's still some issues relative to special needs classrooms. Otherwise, it would be a pretty nice fit. Thank you.
Lori, is this where we want to take a look at the plans, I take it?
Yes, please.
All right. I am going to switch screens, share my screen here. And we'll start with the plan model and that is reflecting early childhoods through 6th grade, staying in Audubon, just as it is currently configured. We also looked at a concept that if the middle school model were pursued further, what that concept could look like. So we have a concept that works for both. And the one thing that you'll notice in both concepts, the primary focus is on the elementary because as Glenn just shared, a lot of the issues that we're seeing from the adequacy and the facility conditions assessment is really at the elementary area. So I'll walk you all through the concept, starting at the front door, which is right here, which stays the same, administrative right there. And as you come in, the one thing that you'll notice is we are mainly keeping the spaces that are in good condition, the spaces that are sized right already, the spaces that were already green. The idea is if it's not broke, let's not fix it. So you'll notice we're keeping many of those spaces as they are, just looking to improve the spaces that need it. The border of the existing building follows a line just like this, the red line that I'm drawing right now. And it follows around like that. So some of the things that you'll notice is that this area, there's some change, and this area, there's some change. And this chunk of the building right here, right through there, that is the oldest portion of the building. You have lower ceilings. It's tough to get mechanical spaces, mechanical space above the ceiling to work there. You have water issues in that area next to those 4th grade classrooms. So we're actually looking at doing a surgical piece there of removing that, building that as new construction. And then the other piece that's new construction is this piece that's right up over here, which is actually has a 2nd story that fits on top of it like that. So that is where we get the extra capacity to get us up to 3 sections per every grade to do that. So going back to what I was saying about the spaces that are right sized, that we're keeping them there, many of these spaces through here and through here are staying much the same. This space, the 1974 piece, it's a little bit older, but it's in good condition and the spaces are sized right. So we are keeping those as they are. But the organization that we want to apply throughout the building is grouping grades together and the academic areas together so it makes it flow easier, so it's easier to move throughout the building, and also increasing the level of safety and security we have through the building as well as functionality. So if you'll notice, after you come past the front entry, we're creating smaller learning communities within the school that are age appropriate. So we have early childhood that's here. We have kindergarten and 1st grade that is here. Above that area, we have 2nd and 3rd grade in their community. And then we have 3rd, 4th, and 5th. I'm sorry, 4th, 5th, and 6th right there in that area there. And then the public areas are more to this end of the building here with the shared commons area here and a revamped kitchen. Media center stays where it's at, but we are wanting to open that up and improve that, get it some exterior daylight. We are setting aside some dollars to deal with the acoustics in the gym area and other deferred maintenance areas going through the building. And then the other thing that you'll notice is that to move through the building from these academic areas to the public areas, we are able to get to the commons area from these areas without having to use this hallway. And right here is where we're looking at doing a special ed suite, which is easily accessible from the academic areas from either direction. Now, we also do want to look at improving special ed by bringing special ed space right into these learning communities themselves. And we're doing that by, you see these small group rooms where we can do pull out for students that need it for just maybe some quick remedial work that wouldn't mean having to go directly down to the special ed suite. And also those small group spaces, they can be used by teachers and staff for collaborative planning. They can also be used for breakout space for students on projects and such, and also stay within the community rather than having to go down to the media center. So this, by adding this 2-story piece right here, this gives us the square footage we need to get 3 sections for every classroom. One of the other things that you'll notice on this site is that we're focusing on improving the bus drop-off lane entirely along here. Currently, if we zoom in on this area down here, you can see in the underlayment there, you can see where the existing parking stalls are right there. We would like to move those over, put parking over in this area and allow that bus drop off to just be continuous. So you can get all the buses in one spot. And then that way we're improving the pickup and drop off for the bus loading areas there with safety. The other advantage of grouping these grade levels into these communities is we are taking what normally would just be hallway space. Like here's some existing hallways here. These are a couple of hallways that we're not touching. But if you look in this area here, we're widening out that hallway and we're actually creating functional space out of what was normally a non-functional space to create some informal learning that's really an extension of that classroom. So teachers and students can break outside the classroom, but yet still be involved. Maybe they're going out to work in small groups out in this area out here, but now teachers can still keep eyes on and keep that connection with their students. And so it's really taking what's normally wasted space as circulation space and it's making it academic space. So that's another concept that we're working into this planning community. So this is what the plan would look like for early childhood through 6th grade at Audubon. Now, if we were to look at a middle school model, we have another concept, another option that would take the 6th graders and put them in a middle school model. And the one thing that you'll notice first and foremost about this is that the improvements that are really happening at the elementary at Audubon are very much the same. We're still wanting to solve a lot of those same issues that we have there. So we still have these learning communities as we're doing here. The one difference being is now there is no second level over this. This is now one story. If I can spell story. But what that does for us then is that actually brings down the cost of what we're doing at Audubon, because we're not building that second story. Everything on the first story, we're still making the same improvements. But to create a middle school option, if we go over to the high school, and if you're familiar with the high school, there is the events entry here to the west. The front door of the school is over here. This is that west wing of the high school, and I'm outlining the existing footprint of the building right now. We would be adding this area in blue to get those 3 extra classrooms to add capacity for the 6th graders. But what this also gives us an option to do is take these existing spaces in the building right here, these classrooms, and by no more than just changing the label on the door, we could take the 7th and 8th graders that are already mixed in at the high school level, and maybe we give them a learning community for those age appropriate grades together at that middle school level, very similar to what we're already doing over here or proposing at the elementary level, which keeps them out of the general high school population. Now, granted, they would still be going to electives like band, music, Phi Ed, career tech ed, shop, VOTech, and other areas, but the majority of their day, they could have a contained area that would keep them separate. Now, one of the things that we did look at is in the original planning of the high school, it was always master planned to add on to the west side to this end, rather than doing this. And that's still a viable option. And actually, when we studied both, doing this piece here versus this piece, they're almost a wash. The difference is you have a little bit more exterior wall on 3 sides to do this, like that, versus you just have 2 sides here. But the trade-off is that you have a little bit of cost in bumping this entry out, which actually gives us the advantage of adding to the cafeteria space. So you have a little bit more breathing room there. So that opens to the cafeteria. And we would have to redo the curb line out here on the site for that drop off. But between the exterior envelope wall, if we were to add here versus some of those additional pieces there, it's really a wash in cost. And so it becomes a question of what works better from an academic standpoint at the high school level. And as if the project were to move forward, we could actually get into the details of that with the staff and the admin of what's best, is extending this hallway along here, or do we try to take advantage of informal learning by making circulation learning space by doing something like that. So these 2 schemes together both have the price tag. This one is 21.2 6 million. And if we look back at option A, that one is 21.3. So that is where the planning is at today, looking at, we have an option, a viable solution that works in either educational model, either middle school or with EC through 6 elementary. And what we're also doing is we're looking at resolving both deferred maintenance issues and the academic space issues at the elementary primarily in both cases. And Lori, you can take control back.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Okay, so next we'll move on into the middle school model with Paula, Dr. Paula Henry. Oh, I think you're still on mute, Paula.
Okay, thank you, Lori, and thank you, Dan. That was a good presentation with the way this middle school would possibly look. So the big question is, well, why a middle school? And because we have so many improvements to do at the elementary school, when we look at best practices for a middle school, now is the time to plan for that. If we are just looking for space, we are looking for space, you could say, well, we're going to move the 6th graders over to the secondary site, but we're really looking at grades 6, 7, and 8, some best practices for all 3 grades. And why is that? That's because that's in a time when physical and psychological changes happen the fastest. And they have social and emotional development. They need relationships. They need a lot of peer relationships too. So within this model, it is a mind shift, and it's really a shift into practices. How do we engage those middle students? Because we know that that's a time that we can either engage them, or sometimes we can, lose them at that middle school level. Students really appreciate student voice and choice. And think about yourself back in 6th grade. I was really excited to move up to the 3rd level in my K-8 building, and it was just all 6th, 7th, and 8th graders up at the very, very top. And we got a lot of voice and choice and project-based work. We had lots of peer relationships, but we really loved our teachers. And that's really what we're working to shift here at the middle level for grade 6, 7, and 8 is building relationships with teachers. So teachers and students really get to know one another so they feel safe. Grade 6, 7, 8, they're natural explorers, they're curious, and they're adventurous. So when we look at developing their intellectual capacity, we want to do that through interdisciplinary learning. And what that is think about, the big why in the world, what makes learning so important. And when I was thinking back to my time in school, I remember doing investigations in history, just writing down our history stories. So, we're engaging math, we're engaging writing and reading. We're really putting those all together into an interdisciplinary study. And some others might be just looking at our world and, why do we live in small communities versus big communities? It's really engaging those 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in some different kinds of thinking so that they feel important as well. Grade 6, 7, and 8, again, they're very vulnerable, they're emotional. So teachers that teach in that setting need to be really aware and really experts in that age group, and they kind of just love that age group. So, you talk with some teachers who will say, well, I couldn't teach anything but kindergarten, and others are, I just love that 6th, 7th, and 8th grade age group. They're really beginning to fully engage in their thinking, and they think about their thinking, and we want to help that grow in those students as well. Also, we want to have more career opportunities for 6th, 7th, and 8th, and we want to have more other kinds of opportunities after school. So it might be more athletics, it might be more activities, it could be more CTE options, career and technical education options. It could even just be clubs like chess club or robotics. And we think that having 6th, 7th, and 8th graders together, they will be able to connect with one another. 6th, 7th, and 8th, just because you're an 8th grader doesn't mean that you're real grown up. And sometimes you have a sixth grader that is more grown up than an eighth grader. So putting kids together like that helps them find someone who is more like them. Now, because it is really a shift in practice, there are many practices that need to be in place for this kind of model, and it needs to be responsive, challenging, empowering, equitable. We want to make sure that it's equitable for all students, and of course, as I mentioned, engaging. The curriculum, again, is interdisciplinary. We might have core teachers for math, so that is more helpful, where we have math teachers who are experts in that field. And then with the collaboration available, because that model is separate from the upper grades 9 through 12, teachers can collaborate, and students really could move back and forth between math and reading, social studies, and connect to the world that way. Also, I think that collaboration, creative thinking, critical thinking, communication, the 4 C's that we talk about so much, is at a whole nother higher level with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I think it's important to recognize that and develop that and help them see that they're important people in the world. So some people will say, well, what's the difference between a junior high school and a middle school? Well, a junior high school is really run on a traditional schedule, and a middle school is not. It's in teams or houses. So when you looked at the map that Dan presented to us, you can see it is more in one space. We have work areas, collaborative areas that students can work together. Grade 7 and 8 in a junior high model is more like a mini high school. And we want to really get away from that. We want to look at best practice for our kids. And it's really an opportune time. If we're really renovating the elementary, then this is the time to make the best practices in place for our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders as well. And then lastly, I think that if you think about it as a school within a school, some parents might have a concern that, these 6th graders are with the 9th, 10th, and 11th, and 12th, but that is not the case. It is a school within a school, so that we would have more separate. And as Dan said, we would be moving students still to their encore classes, but that would be on the main floor. And we would be knowing those kids really well, because we said it's all based on relationships, and that feeling safe and secure and feeling significant, and then having fun as well in a middle school model. So overall, we're really excited about exploring this. I think our staff is, they too say, 5th graders are still kind of young. 6th graders are those in-betweeners. They're not really young. They're not quite there yet. And this is a great research-based model for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I think that's about what I have to share, unless there are questions. On this screen, you can see that.
The schedule, if you want to walk through this real quick.
So that would be a sample schedule. And you could see that you have, maybe if you're teacher A, you would be teaching language arts and English, perhaps social studies, and you would be teaching, you could be teaching all 6th graders or 6th and 7th graders, or maybe even 6th, 7th, and 8th. But students would move around a bit, but it could be that at times when you're doing more in-depth interdisciplinary studies, you would not be on a bell schedule. It would be flexible for more investigation and collaboration. And then there would be time for exploratory classes for students, music, art, CTE, career exploration. And we have many teachers here already that have worked in a middle school model, and I have as well. And you can see Andrew Eklund is our band teacher, and he has a great quote down there: as educators, it's important that we tailor our teaching to every student. And that's what we aim to do.
Thank you, Paula. Now we have Jody with the financial piece.
Thanks, Lori. So the first charts that you're seeing here are taxes for the school district for taxes payable in 2020. We know you just received your 2021 tax statements. So we're gathering all that data from counties, and we'll be able to provide updated information, but we don't expect any significant changes with respect to how these numbers look. So This again is total school taxes, doesn't represent your entire tax bill. So it doesn't have the county taxes on here or city or township, but looking at school taxes and showing how it compares to other surrounding school districts. The first chart is based upon a residential home with an estimated market value of 150,000. And the county tells us that's a good average for the houses that are in town. And so you'll see there that Lake Park Audubon is second lowest, with Frazee just a little lower, not for lack of trying. They had a referendum in 2018 and passed one of their questions, still have some continuing needs to address there. And then you'll see the remaining school districts, neighboring school districts, and how their school taxes compare, all higher than Lake Park Audubon. The second chart is a same data, school taxes, but on a home with an estimated market value of 350,000. And this is more representative of some of the properties that are out on the lakes. So that's just kind of a starting point so that you know how you compare to other districts in your area. And the next chart, the next slide, provides information related to the school building bond agricultural credit. So this first came into play for taxes payable in 2018 and has provided property tax relief to owners of agricultural properties. Prior to that time, the burden on the agricultural property owners was pretty heavy for a bond referendum. On operating referendums, for example, they are only paying on the house, garage, and 1 acre, but their full land was taxed for bond referendums. So after many years lobbying at the legislature, they were able to get some tax relief. And initially that was at a level of 40%, but you can see here in the bottom lower hand corner of the slide that credit has increased. It's now at a level of 55% and is scheduled to go up to 70% for taxes payable in 23 and later. So really significant property tax relief on debt service levies for bond referendums. This is a credit that's automatically applied. So if you do own agricultural property and look at your tax statement, you're going to see a separate line item for it. You don't need to apply for it. It's applied automatically, and you should see the tax relief that you've received related to the district's existing debt already. So these are just a couple examples of bond issue amounts that are kind of in the range that were shared earlier on the plans. So at a $20 million bond issue or $25 million bond issue, we've included in these calculations an average interest rate of 3%, which right now is high. So interest rates are very, very low right now on municipal bonds. And for 20-year bond issues, we've been seeing rates under 2%. But we wanted to provide a little cushion because we don't know where rates will be. Assuming the district may move forward with the November election, they would be issuing the bonds likely in early calendar year 2022. So just know that there's some cushion built into these dollar amounts just to be conservative at this point in time. So you can see on a $150,000 home, the estimated annual tax impact on a $20 million bond issue is $56, and on a $25 million bond issue is $79. If you think back to those comparative charts that we showed to begin with, this would then put Lake Park Audubon a little above Pelican Rapids, but still lower than the majority of school districts that we had included on that chart, and still well below the group and state averages that were shown on that chart. So the next is just a continuation of the tax impact amounts, just to show some different types of properties, including ag properties and seasonal rec properties, since we know a large portion of the tax base in Lake Park Audubon is seasonal rec. We know that they're not able to vote in the district on a bond referendum. They need to vote in the district where their residence is. So, but just to be able to provide that information, since there's so many taxpayers that do fall into this category. On the agricultural properties, those are net of the school building bond agricultural credit already. So again, those are annual amounts, but net of the school building bond agricultural credit. And then this shows the interest rates, and as you can see, they're at historic low levels. So we've been getting lots of demand for school building bonds and really nice low interest rates, which has been great. So on the right-hand side, you'll see some timeline information. If the district wanted to move forward with an election in November of 2021, there are a couple of statutory requirements that they need to meet. They need to submit information to the Minnesota Department of Education for what's called their review and comment process. And then a formal resolution would need to be passed by the board by August 20th. And you can see a couple other more specific deadlines leading up then to election day, which is November 2nd this year.
Okay, thank you, Jody.
Thanks, Jody. This is Mr. Barr, the elementary principal. I just thought I would just mention, as you can see on the screen, there is a website, lpapavetheway.com, that you're able to go to. It'll have today's presentation, any other presentations, any of the surveys that are done, the timeline. And it's also good as questions come up, you can either yourself or refer community members on there. There's links to ask questions or make connections as well. So just thought I would put a plug for that. As it's on the screen, if you take a picture with your smartphone of the QR code, it'll also bring you there as well. But it's a good one for those that aren't able to make some of these presentations with busy schedules, that they can still get some of the same information and have an opportunity to make sure their voice is heard and ask any questions. I thought I'd also just offer, as you can see up there, last night, this is where I offered individual tours. Not going to attempt that virtually through the laptop here, but just thought I'd put a plug out if anyone that's listening today would like a tour. If you just call the elementary office, numbers up there, or you can email me, we can definitely set up a time I can walk you through the building and you can see the space that way, or some more to see it in person with some of the plans that are presented as well. So also just thought a good time to open it up for questions, whether you have specific questions for me about the elementary school after hearing the great information presented, or anyone else on our panel would be happy to answer a question as well. You can either unmute yourself, if you know how, you could raise a hand, but feel free just to unmute, or you can use the chat function as well.
And Jody, we did have one question come in for you. What is the estimated cost per acre increase on farmland?
So that would be shown on the tax impact chart that we had up the second part of that. So for example, on a estimated market value, 4,000 per acre, you can see it's 71 cents per acre if it were a $20 million bond issue, or just over $1 for a $25 million bond issue. And we know that ag properties vary a lot. So if we were to move forward with a referendum, we do have a tax calculator that provides information related to different types of properties, but we ask the agricultural property owners to contact us with their parcel IDs directly so that we can do a customized tax impact, just because, again, the value per acre isn't shown on your tax statements or any of the other information that you get from the county. So we check in with them to get your specific value and provide a customized calculation.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for the group? We do also have in the chat function, I did we posted a facility survey. This was handed out last night at the open house. This would be an option too. You can add some feedback and hand that into the district to share some of your feedback on the information you heard. So feel free to print that out and hand that into the district. Okay, and no other questions?
I've got an eye on the chat and there haven't been any posted.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, they didn't see anything in the chat. As far as the survey?
No, just that there wasn't, I think the comment was that there's no questions within that.
Correct.
Got Okay, thanks. Okay, well, we did record this presentation, so what we'll do is we will post the recorded version on the website that